My name is Still Waters, and these are my stories. I am an experiencer of the phenomenon, an empath, a lucid dreamer, and a high consciousness traveler of other dimensions and alternate timelines that make up our universe. Over the past several years, I have awakened to a state of consciousness that has allowed me to glimpse into my simultaneous lives occurring in this universe. Like pages of a notepad, these alternate timelines are contained and exist simultaneously as one. And like the ink from a felt-tipped pen, my higher consciousness bleeds into these timelines night after night to experience these alternate timelines of my life. I do not pretend to know the purpose of these high consciousness experiences, only that they happen to me every night in full detail, and have decided to start writing them down and sharing them. Step into my world of awakening and enlightenment that I call the Chronicles of Still Waters. The following high consciousness experience you are about to enjoy is called the abandoned property. Last night, I awakened in the dream state in an area near a metropolis of what appeared to be undeveloped land on the outskirts of the city. I had been brought there as the organization I was working for owned the property and was in the process of developing something on the site of vacant industrial land. It was a large property, consisting of at least 50 acres or more of land. The site looked abandoned and deserted, but as we toured the property, I noticed that there was a team already busy surveying the land using a very elaborate mapping system of laying out a grid pattern on the ground with lasers, creating a very precise and grid-like pattern on the areas they surveyed. The entire crew appeared to be Chinese, and they were working very hard, quickly laying out these grid patterns throughout the entire property. They looked like how a tailor sizes up a suit on a man with a measuring tape, quickly stretching out these grid patterns on the ground and marking their data points before moving on to the next area of land to survey. On the property, there were ultra-high voltage power transformers located around the perimeter. Their placement on the property made no sense or logistical purpose. The high power transformers appeared to be sourced underground to each unit and were heavily protected with fencing and massive insulated barriers that clearly indicated that they contained high-power supplies of electricity. I had never seen such a high-power electrical source staggered on a construction site as this one. Whatever it had been connected to, it was evident that it required a lot of energy to operate. Also on the property were several concrete structures that appeared to be 1 and 2 stories in height. They looked to me like vehicle parking structures, as they were very wide but not very tall. I thought they must have been parking structures because all the streets that were on the site all connected to these buildings. My first thoughts were that these structures were remnants of a failed construction project that was never completed to its final design and needed to be demolished to reclaim the land for a new venture. But the question of why there were completed roads to each of these concrete structures puzzled me. Why had the company I had been hired to work for bought what seemed to be a failed construction project and now wanted me to take over the assignment to redevelop it? At that moment, I knew that was why I was there. I realized that I was being provided a tour of the site so I could commence my commission of building whatever they wanted me to build there. And that concluded this moment of the timeline in my dream state. In that moment, this experience did not make any sense to me. I felt that the organization that I had been hired to work with had made a terrible mistake buying this property. The land was located at a considerable distance from the city and would make it very challenging for the population that lived in that city to access whatever service or product they were going to provide out here. Not only that, the logistics of conveying materials to and from the city for the construction would be an added expense to the operation that could simply be resolved by purchasing a property closer to this metropolis. Location was clearly not a priority for this company. Then there was the issue with the land. I assumed it had been chosen solely based on the value of the property, not its location. It had what looked to be abandoned structures on it that clearly were of no use to any developer, that would have to be demolished, the debris removed from the site, and an entire reclamation process would have to be done to make this property acceptable for new construction to even begin. Engineers would have to be brought in at great expense to survey and do soil tests before any planning could even get underway. Even with the savings that may have been thought to have been made on the initial purchase of the property due to its state of condition, I could easily see the costs involved in making the land ready for construction would escalate and quickly eat that up. I knew that would be a major challenge for me to keep this project within its budget. As I watched this team of foreign surveyors plotting out the land with this very advanced surveying equipment, my attention focused on the gigantic concrete structures that remained on the property. I wondered, what the hell do we do with these massive structures other than demolish them and start all over, to reclaim the land they occupied? Why would someone be so dumb as to buy land to build something on that would require so much time and effort to clear before even starting? Even though they appeared to be unfinished buildings on the property, I started to notice that there were no signs that this was an abandoned construction project. As a matter of fact, the more I looked at these structures, the more they appeared to be complete and intact, with finished roads connecting them. It looked like this site had been designed with a specific purpose and exact calculation. The laser grids that were being plotted by the team of foreign surveyors would also reaffirm that observation, as they all seemed to line up with each one of these concrete structures to the ultra-high voltage power transformers located throughout the property. What was I missing to see in this property that would make sense of all of it? That would all come into focus when I returned to this timeline. Later in my dream state, I awakened once again to this timeline, now inside a building. From my surroundings, it appeared to be a military facility of some sort. There were many people in uniform walking around, as well as many people in what appeared to be flight suits, like what fighter pilots would wear. This would seem to be the main type of uniform being worn inside this very advanced building. I too was wearing this type of flight suit, and I was following someone of high rank who clearly had access to any location in the building. From what I gathered, I was part of this team, or this crew. I could not discern what branch of the military I was with. It appeared to be a mix of naval, air force, and marine branches of the military, but not having a specific or unified designation. All I knew is we were all working together for preparations of some important event about to happen here. As I followed this high-ranking official throughout this building, he was showing me many of the features and design cues of the building that seemed to be almost finished. There were still construction workers on site, putting the final touches on some of the walls or technologies integrated into the buildings. I would put the level of completion at about 99%. The more this official spoke to me, the more I realized that this was a continuation of the construction I had begun earlier. It had been several months, if not years, for it to reach its conclusion, and now I was being given a tour of what I had a part in creating. It was all becoming to make sense that I had been the major architect in this project, and all the work I was being shown was the fruits of my labor. The building was very unusual because it seemed to be very modular and made of a composite material. There was no wood or concrete inside the building. It was mainly made of steel, glass, and this composite material which gave it a futuristic appearance. The building was also interconnected with what seemed to be a series of buildings, like a campus of a university or large hospital facility. In some areas, it had high vaulted ceilings, making it appear like an open courtyard of a shopping mall. The more I observed the functionality of the complex, it felt more like a self-contained city that was constructed on the vacant industrial land that I first visited. It was all starting to make sense. The ultra-high voltage power transformers that I had initially seen were specifically built and located where they were to power this massive microcity. The roads leading to the concrete structures were platforms that the buildings were built upon, and the roads to them were to allow supplies to be delivered underneath. I was very impressed with the way the project had finished. It literally felt like a micro-city. I realized then, with all the military personnel on site, that perhaps what was constructed was a new concept for a state-of-the-art military base. As the tour continued, I was brought to various locations, such as a shopping mall, a dining area, a library, and a gym facility. The ergonomic design of the gym facility was laid out in the way I had my own personal gym at home, and it appeared from people using it that they also liked the way it was designed. The official that I was with pointed out to me that not only this gym, but the entire complex was in fact my design, that I had created this entire infrastructure. I was a little taken aback by this statement when he said that to me. Apparently, I was the integral brain trust when it came to this entire facility. The one thing that impressed me the most was the integration of all these buildings into a cohesive infrastructure, and how the construction appeared to be very modular and very efficient by design. Even though I had said it was made of steel, glass, and composite material, I started to quickly realize that this complex had unusually small windows, and all of the natural light supplied indoors was being artificially created. When I finally did see a window to the outside, I approached it to see something very startling about this infrastructure. What I had helped create wasn't technically a building. It wasn't even a city or a military base. It was, in fact, a galactic starship designed to travel in space. I quickly realized all the heightened activity in the complex, and my presence and purpose on the site was not just to be given a tour of what I had helped create, but to oversee the rapid completion of the project. At that moment, I realized that what I had first thought was an abandoned property was a shipyard for constructing this massive spacecraft to leave the planet and spend its life in outer space. The people in it were the crew that would be operating and living on board for many years to come, and I was to be a part of that crew. As I looked out the small window, I could see the ultra-high voltage power transformers were charging stations for this enormous vessel to power it during the construction phase, and to also energize it for its launch. What I had first observed as vehicle parking structures were to supply access to the platforms for the construction phase of the Starship, and to allow the spacecraft to rest upon while being docked in the galactic shipyard. It was all making sense now when I had first arrived at the abandoned property, that it was not abandoned at all. It was simply an empty shipyard. The team of foreign surveyors were simply plotting out the dimensions of the next vessel to be built to maintain their distance from the ultra-high voltage power transformers. And the reason that the land was so far away from the metropolis was to ensure a safe distance from the city once it was ready for launch into outer space from Earth. I was told the timeline for launch had been advanced by 6 months, and was now scheduled to be leaving within a week's time. I was amazed to not only have been involved in such a monumental task, but that I would also be joining this crew on the craft that I had built as a type of onboard custodian. Considering the sheer size of the craft and the amount of energy it would require leaving the Earth's atmosphere, we seemed to have resolved the energy issue for getting such an enormous structure into orbit. As all the pieces started to fall into place for me in this experience, I did not feel this project was being done to escape our planet, but more to explore outer space. This wasn't the first galactic starship built on Earth, nor was it the last. We had seemed to have finally broken the barriers of traveling in outer space, and as a species had grown a desire to explore the universe beyond the planet Earth. The change in the launch schedule wasn't done out of urgency, but simply because the project had been completed well ahead of schedule and afforded us the luxury of doing so. As I stood in awe, all I could think of was what a time to be alive to see the advancement of our civilization, to not only have the ability to dream, but to now be able to explore the universe for the sheer desire of curiosity and enlightenment. This concludes my high consciousness experience of the abandoned property. This broadcast and the content is copyrighted, all rights reserved. No part of this media publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written consent of the copyright owner. This publication is a work of fiction. Names, characters, organizations, places, events, and incidents are either used in a fictitious manner or are fictional. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, actual organizations, or actual events is purely coincidental. For rights and permissions, please contact the author.